All right, it looks like our numbers are starting to stabilize. I'm sure we'll have more people join us as we get moving, but we have a lot to cover in the next hour, so I think we should get going. My name is Rebecca Carter, and I'm the Director of Climate Adaptation and Resilience at WII, and I'm joined by three of my colleagues who will join me in presenting four of our climate risk data platforms and walk you through sort of the why, the how, what's included in the platform, and give you a chance to ask plenty of questions. So I'll be presenting our AgriAdapt platform, and then I'll turn to Shivani Lakshman, who will present Aqueduct. Leandra Vigna will present Climate Watch, and Tappan Parker will tell you about the systems change lab. Next slide. Okay, so I think it's important to understand sort of at the outset where climate change or where climate risk assessment fits in to what we call the adaptation cycle. It is indeed the very first step that we need to take, understanding our climate risks before we can think about how to reduce them, what actions to take to reduce them, establish our priorities, get finance and implement those priority actions, and also monitor, learn, and evaluate and continually adapt to intensifying climate change impacts. And that's where these four platforms that we're going to tell you about fit in. So different types of climate risk data that are all freely accessible, publicly available. You'll hear more details on that in just a moment. Next slide. So when we think about assessing climate risks, it helps to ask who, what, and how. So in terms of who, I would argue that it's basically everyone, governments and public sector entities like hospitals and schools, financial institutions, companies, civil society organizations, individuals, pretty much everyone needs to understand all of the different climate risks that they face, what they're already seeing now, but also how that's going to intensify as climate change continues to get worse, at least for a while, as we work hard to mitigate and reduce emissions. In terms of what, we need to really understand the current and expected climate change impacts. We need to understand the physical, social, economic, and financial risks that they create, and how we can reduce those risks. We need to identify and assess different levels of exposure to particular risks, different types of hazards, and the vulnerabilities. In other words, who is affected in what ways by these climate change impacts, so that we can integrate this information into decision-making. So for example, governments may need to think about how to design infrastructure that will be more resilient to, let's say, more severe floods. Hospitals may be dealing with, increased injuries from disasters or new types of diseases. Schools need to keep their students safe. Neighborhoods need to think about, how can they get together to have things like evacuation plans, or to have a stronger voice to have their needs addressed by other decision makers. So it all comes together in assessing climate change risks. Next slide. So moving on to our agenda for today, I'm going to briefly introduce you to the AgriAdapt platform, and then Shivani will cover Aqueduct. Leo will talk about Climate Watch, and Tappan Parker will introduce you to the systems change lab. Next slide. So to start thinking about AgriAdapt and climate change impacts on food systems, here's a few quotes from the IPCC AR6 Working Group 2 Summary for Policymakers. This was the 2022 report on climate change impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation. And so with regard to food systems, the IPCC notes that climate change, including the increases in frequency and intensity of extremes, has already reduced food and water insecurity, which hinders our efforts to meet sustainable development goals. And although overall agricultural productivity has increased, climate change has slowed this growth over the past 50 years globally. And increasing weather and climate extreme events have exposed millions of people to food insecurity and reduced water security. Next slide. And it's important to note, not only with AgriAdapt and thinking about food systems, but that what we're talking about here is systemic climate risk. I think Tappan in particular will touch on that with the Systems Change Lab. But just to think about that back again in terms of food systems, it's not just the individual impacts that we need to understand and to really understand our risk, it's the interaction between them. And kind of the knock-on effects that can be quite wide-ranging. So it's not just how severe droughts can we expect, it's sort of what kind of impacts are they going to have on food prices, on household incomes, health risks like malnutrition, et cetera, that we really need to be assessing when we think about climate risk information. Next slide. So this same IPCC report, includes a bunch of different options for agricultural adaptation, making food systems and agricultural value chains more resilient. But underneath all of these comes assessing and understanding climate risks. Next slide. So that brings us to AgriAdapt. So if you go to agriadapt.org, you'll find the beta version of a free online tool that is intended to help agricultural producers and other links of agricultural value chains. So not just the farmers themselves, although obviously they are a very important part of food systems, but also farmer producer organizations, processors, distributors, government agencies, and financial institutions to better understand their long-term climate risks and make decisions and investments that will withstand intensifying climate impacts. Next slide. So we are now in our second phase of AgriAdapt. During our first phase, we co-created a user-centered prototype of the platform that you'll find online. When I say user-centered, I mean that we did extensive outreach and engagement with our intended users and tried to have the climate data that AgriAdapt includes be as user-friendly as possible. We also published a working paper that describes our stakeholder-driven approach, and maybe we can post that in the chat. So now in our second phase, we are sort of updating and expanding the current data with a focus on India. We're adding an adaptation solutions menu, and we're exploring the interoperability with existing apps and platforms that are already widely used by our teams. Next slide. So the tool at present has 3 pilot value chains. It is meant to be scaled to include additional crops in more locations. But if you go to agriadapt.org, you'll find that it focuses at this point on rice in Tamil Nadu, India, cotton in Andhra Pradesh, and coffee in Colombia. However, as Leo will demonstrate, it does have global data for additional crops in additional locations that you can get to through this same platform. Next slide. And I think our demonstration today will focus largely on the Climate Risk Explorer, which brings together data on climate hazards and risks to agriculture. So you can understand future risks out to 2080 under 2 different emissions pathways. You can browse dozens of scientific data sets and visualize them, put them on maps with the click of a button, and also overlay different layers to understand sort of the more complex effects the climate change is having on food systems, so that you can look at effects on cropland, production numbers, processing, and trade. There's really quite a lot of data there. And with that, I would like to pass over to my colleague Leo to walk you through AgriAdapt.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for this intro. So now I'm going to do the live demo section of the AgriAdapt. So from here, I'm just going to change screen and go directly into our homepage. So here we are, agriadapt.org. And then the first thing that you see here, it's an introduction to what is AgriAdapt able to do. And then the way the platform organizes, it basically has 2 main modules. And I'm going to show you. So as you scroll down, you'll see that first we have this explore the map option. So from here, and if you're familiar with other WRI platforms, it is based on the Resource Watch platform. So we'll have tons of data sources that you can overlay and play with to show you different layers of climate change and how it affects agriculture. I'm going to be showing you how that works in just a minute, but this is one of the modules that we have, I would say the main one. And then the other one, it's this value chain.
Sorry to interrupt you. We're just seeing this slide still. We're not seeing the AgriAdapt.
Oh, it hasn't changed?
Nope.
Okay. Let me stop sharing and then share again my
Thanks so much.
My window. Yeah, thanks for flagging. I was already showing that. Okay, share again. So can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Well, let me know later when I go back to the PowerPoint. Apologies for that. I was saying that this is a homepage and that AgriAdapt tool split between two main modules. One is the explore the map, and the other one are the crop cards that we have. The first one I was just showing is in here that it's based on Resource Watch technology, and I'll be showing you how to play around with all the different layers and how you can see all this information for the whole world, not just Colombia and India. And then the other section is in case you're not too familiar or you want to have more of an introduction on how climate change may be affecting specifically these three different crops, we do have these pages where you can go and see immediately for the different steps into the value chain of these different crops, how climate change affects them. And then for a quick start, because we know this can be a bit too complex at the beginning, we do have some pre-made maps in here. So let's say that we are interested in coffee and we want to know how water stress and higher temperatures are going to affect coffee production in the future. We do have one card already pre-selected here. So we go to view on the map. That will take us to the map view here. You see we have the layers adding in here. Now I'm going to be covering what you see. So first, in here, this section here at the bottom right, we have the different layers they have selected. I'm going to be focusing on Colombia. And in this case, we're interested in coffee, water stress, and temperature. So those are the three layers that we have in here. It does matter the order where it comes because you can overlay them and put them into different places. So you can see this lighter blue, that one represents the coffee Robusta variety production. But for Colombia, the one that we're most interested in is the Arabica. So I'm going to change that in here. And you see how you have much more details. And also, as I zoom in, we see that one of the options that the platform gives is to overlay and change the opacity. So I do want to see more clearly what's the overlay between water stress and the production levels. And I can see that for the Bogota region, there's a higher level of baseline water stress. So I can zoom in there. And then that's really the added value of this platform where you can start seeing what are the relationships between all these different layers, plus the vast amount of data that we have. From here, and also showing you just a couple more features that it has. Because we did this quick selection, it already gives you these three layers, but you can select among all these other options that we have here, like landslide susceptibility, aqueduct seasonal variability. We're going to be covering aqueduct later today in this presentation. And then you can also filter by different scenarios. One more thing that you can do is to go into the analysis, select for a specific location. In this case, let's say we pick a point on the map, and then we go to add location, and you get the information for each of the different layers that you have as a different column. And you can add as many points as you want, and you can also download this information. Now, this is the map function. As I was mentioning, there's this other feature that it's within the here, the quick explanation of the other crops. Let me change it. I have the zoom thing here, so I'm gonna move it around. So I have the crops. Let me just go over coffee, where you can see very quickly how climate change is going to affect coffee, in this case, the value change in all these different steps. So you can see it from the inputs. We have some graphics on land suitability, how coffee is going to be affected in the upcoming years. Same with labor, for example, where we can overlay the Universal Thermal Climate Index by showing you how temperature is going to increase, and because coffee is harvested by hand, so how is that going to affect the amount of days that workers can go into the field and harvest the coffee. And just like that, you can also go to production step and see some other data points that we have on production volume and on trade. So I think I'm within time for AgriAdapt. So I'm going to go back to the presentation, and now I give it back to Shivani.
Great, thank you, Leo. So we can't talk about climate risks without talking about water risks, as water will both be impacted by climate change and will also be key for helping us mitigate and adapt to climate change. it's clear from looking at recent headlines that there is a lot to worry about when it comes to water resources, both today and in the future. And in order to manage these issues effectively, we need to be able to understand what regions in the world are most at risk of facing water challenges and what these water challenges are in different locations. And we need globally consistent and trusted data to do so. So that's where Aqueduct comes in. Aqueduct is a screening tool that allows users to measure and map water challenges in order to evaluate risks, set targets, and inform smart water policy and management strategies in priority locations. Next slide. So we have 4 tools in the Aqueduct platform. We have the Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas, which maps and analyzes current and future water risks across catchments across the world. Aqueduct Country Rankings, which allows users to understand and compare national and subnational water risks. Aqueduct Food, which allows users to understand and identify water risks to agriculture and food security. And Aqueduct Floods, which provides a deep information as well as the costs and benefits of investing in flood protection. Next slide. So today I'll be giving a brief demo of the Water Risk Atlas, which is the flagship tool of the platform. And we actually just launched the 4th iteration of the Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas a few months ago with updated inputs to our hydrological model and new future projections using the latest data from CMIP6. Next slide, please. So before we begin the demo, the Water Risk Atlas provides information on 13 indicators shown here that span physical risks for both water quantity and quality. So on the quantity side of things, we have baseline water stress, water depletion, interannual and seasonal variability, groundwater table decline, as well as some flood risk and drought risk indicators. And on the quality side, we have an indicator on untreated connected wastewater and one on coastal eutrophication potential as a measure of nutrient pollution. And we also have a few indicators around regulatory and reputational risks, primarily around access to drinking water and sanitation. So these indicators can either be looked at individually or they can also be aggregated up into an overall water risk score using either default, industry-defined, or user-defined weighting schemes. And again, these indicators in the Water Risk Atlas show risks at the catchment level for over 16,000 catchments around the world. Next slide. So the one indicator that I'll call out briefly is baseline water stress, which is one of the flagship indicators on the tool and is also used in AgriAdapt, as Leo was showing us. And in a moment, I'll use it to illustrate how a user might use the Water Risk Atlas to conduct a water risk assessment. So baseline water stress indicates competition over water resources by measuring the ratio of water demand to renewable available water supply in a catchment. And that ratio of demand to supply is shown as a percentage that's separated into 6 levels of risk. And generally speaking, a catchment is considered to be in high water stress when over 40% of the available supply is required to meet demand. Next slide. Great. So on arriving to the Aqueduct website, you'll see a map visualizing our data on the right, and you can change the data options and indicators on the left. You can see there are many options to viewing our water data. We have baseline and future time period options. So the baseline shows water challenges as they are today in terms of chronic long-term trends from 1979 to 2019. And the future tab shows future data centered on the years 2030, 2050, and 2080 under different scenarios. So on the baseline tab, you're able to view annual data or monthly data for select indicators. The website defaults to showing you our overall water risk indicator, which is a good indicator to get a sense of the general water situation in a location, but it does hide a lot of details that you'll find while looking at each indicator separately, which you can do by clicking on any one of the 13 on the left that I mentioned previously. So, and then if you click on the question mark for any of the indicators, you can find a short description and a link to our technical note for a full description of what that indicator is and how it was developed. Next slide. So to start off, Aqueduct has a wide range of users and user groups that use the tool, but the private sector is one of our main user groups who use Aqueduct to prioritize locations for water stewardship or water management action or target setting. So let's say that you would like to do a water risk assessment for a set of locations, perhaps within your company's operations or supply chains. So first we need to add the locations to Aqueduct, and you can do this through clicking the map, entering an address, or importing a file for up to 500 locations. And you could also download the data and use this using your own GIS software. So let's say we have a lot of locations and a lot of coordinates. So we'll go ahead and we'll select import file. Next slide. And then this text box will open up where you can add your file of addresses or coordinates. And we have templates linked here to show how to format that. So be sure to stick to that as closely as possible to be sure that the location analyzer works properly. Next slide. And then when successfully uploaded, you'll see your locations appear under the Analyze heading on the left, and you'll also see them pop up visually on the right. Next slide. And scrolling over on the left, you can see the scores for your selected indicator for each location. You can also scroll back up to the list of indicators and select a different one, and the tool will update to show you that score. Next slide. So we've tried to keep the tool as simple and intuitive as possible, so it only shows the selected indicator on the web page, but you can download the data to view the full list of indicators for each location. So let's say we want to look a little further into multiple indicators. We would open the CSV with all of our locations. So a spreadsheet like this will open up. Again, we have 13 indicators along with raw values, scores, categories, and labels. So be sure to use the instructions we have linked to decipher the column names. But as an example, we'll start with looking at baseline water stress or competition over water resources. And from the info link, we'll see that the column name we're interested in is BWS label, and that will tell us the category of baseline water stress in each catchment. So low, low to medium, medium to high, high, extremely high, etc. So next slide. So the locations not grayed out here are my locations with current high or extremely high water stress, or they're arid and low water use locations that could become extremely high water stress with additional demand. So from this analysis, these may be locations that I need to prioritize to investigate further with local information or support water stewardship or water management strategies in those areas to address water quantity related risks. Next slide. If we go a little deeper into the analysis, we could also prioritize places with multiple water risks at once, say high water stress and also high interannual variability. So these are places that already have high competition over water resources and would experience even more competition or lack of water in dry years. And of course, you can also look at some of our water quality related and water access indicators. Quantity may not be the main water issue in every location. It may be water quality and water access that are priority challenges in some locations. So we recommend looking holistically across all indicators. Next slide. So you can also view that aggregation of all 13 risk indicators in the overall and custom water risk scores, which are in the latter columns on the sheet. And again, that gives you an indication of risk across all indicators in all categories. And we also have a bunch of industry-specific weighting schemes for that overall water risk score. Great, last slide. So Aqueduct is not only useful for assessing current water risk, but also for planning for the future. So on the Future tab, you can view data on some of our indicators: water stress, depletion, supply, demand, and variability, projected out to 2030, 2050, and 2080 under 3 different scenarios: pessimistic, business as usual, and optimistic. And these correspond to socioeconomic and climate scenarios from the latest IPCC report. And I won't do a full demo of this, but as with the baseline data, you're able to view these indicators on the tool or in the data download. And just a quick caveat here, it's important to note that climate science is really complicated. And so the optimistic climate scenario does not necessarily mean lower water stress. That's a question that we get a lot. So we recommend looking at the projections of water supply and demand in your basins to understand the drivers of those projected water stress scores. So in conclusion, Aqueduct is a useful tool to understand, prioritize, and address current and future water risks using globally comparable data. But it is a global model, has some limitations at the local level, and we always recommend that users supplement Aqueduct analyses with local data to the extent possible. That's not always available. Great. So with that, I think I will pass it back to Leo for Climate Watch.
Thank you very much, Shivani, for this overview of Aqueduct. So next, let me click in here. I'm going to be introducing you to Climate Watch. I'll be doing first a quick intro on what Climate Watch is, and then I'm going to be jumping into a live demo. Climate Watch, it's quite a large tool and it covers a lot of data points. So I'm just going to be focusing on the ones that are relevant for today's discussion, which is around climate risk data. So to get started with, just doing a quick recap of where does Climate Watch belongs to. So not a surprise because this is a WRI presentation, but we are one of the data platforms from the World Resources Institute, the one that is focused on climate commitments from countries. But as you can see, and as you're experiencing today by hearing the other presentations, WRI does have a lot of other data tools. We're focusing today on climate risk, but the data tools that we have in the Institute go further than that. And so I really invite you to explore them because they add a lot of value to whatever research you might be doing. Now, very quickly covering on what I mean by climate commitments for Climate Watch. So some of you might be familiar with the Paris Agreement, which is this legally binding agreement that most countries signed back in 2015 with this global goal of reducing global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The way that this agreement works is that countries come and get together every 5 years and submit a national determined contribution, which is the key climate commitment document that we track on Climate Watch, where countries bring together what are their pledges to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and to act on climate change, with the idea that every year this ratchet up mechanism will evolve so that in every iteration of the NDC, countries are going to be more ambitious and ultimately lead all together to this goal of 1.5 degrees. Now, the Paris Agreement also invites countries to submit a long-term strategy, which is similar to the NDCs, but it has a longer-term horizon, so it gives more perspective on where the country is going towards. And then in addition to that, countries are also invited to submit a net zero target where they commit to become carbon neutral by around mid-century. Here's a quick overview of some of the modules that we have on Climate Watch. I mentioned it's quite an extensive platform, but today I'm just going to be covering 2 of this that deal mostly with climate risk data. And then of course, as you can see, Climate Watch is supported by a large number of leading organizations around the world. So we're grateful to them for supporting us and giving their continued support. And now I'm jumping back into the Climate Watch platform. So here we are, Climate Watch homepage. You can go to climatewatchdata.org and you'll see this. There's a similar visualization to the one that I just showed you. But from here, I want to call your attention to this top bar menu, where you can see that we have the accesses to all the different modules that I showed in those quick snapshots. And then in case you want to be up to date on the latest news for Climate Watch, we have here the notification bell, where you can see, for example, the latest country that submitted a new NDC, or any new research or new data that we published on Climate Watch. You can also subscribe to our update emails. We send one every month. So I also suggest you to sign up to that if you want to be up to date on what's going on in the climate commitment world. Now, for today's topic, I want to cover first the country profile pages. So if you go to the countries tab here, you can then hover over the map and select the country that you're interested in, or you can go down this list, or even type it down in here. So today I'm going to be covering Argentina, just as a demo country. And I'll show you what do we have in this country profile page and what is the climate risk related data that may help you if you're focusing on this topic. So our main objective with these country profile pages is really to give you an overview of what's the climate situation of any country. So you will see here that we have hundreds of data points, and we try to organize them from a top to bottom perspective, starting here with some more general values, like for example, emissions per capita, total emissions of the country, population, and so on. So we can give you a context of where the country stands, as well as rankings to see where the country is within all the other countries I have data for. Now, as I scroll down, you can see we have information on what are the climate commitments documents submitted by the country. We can see Argentina submitted all of them. So first NDC, updated NDC, long-term strategy, and a net zero target. Then we have some top line indicators on the level of ambition and how it has changed from one NDC to the newer version. But really what I want to focus on today is scrolling down further in here to show you this main section that we have. So how vulnerable is Argentina to climate risk? We have this for all countries. We have selected here these 6 boxes that can give you also a quick idea of where the country stands. So in terms of NDCs, national determined contributions, and adaptation, we do keep track of these 4 key indicators. So first, does the NDC have an adaptation component? In this case, Argentina has it. Does the NDC identify adaptation priorities? Yes, it does. And then we also have these other 2 on financial needs for implementing those adaptation priorities, and whether the country mentions loss and damage for climate change. I'm going to be diving a little bit deeper into this in just a minute. We also cover some data on vulnerability and readiness, as well as the natural hazard occurrences for the country. We can see here for Argentina, the top one at the list is floods. One thing to mention here, and that's something that we strive to do with all our WRI platform, it's really to be as transparent as possible. So as you saw in Shivani's presentation and also in AgriAdapt, we always keep a tab and button here on information where you can access all the metadata from every single data point that you're going to see on our site. And you can see methodologies behind it, data of content, where it's coming from, and links to the original data. Now, this is some of the climate risk information you can get from the country profile page, but we do have some other modules that tracks climate risk information from NDCs, and that it's located in here. So commitments, we have one module that deals exclusively with NDCs, which is our Explore NDC module. And then from here, what happens is like this. A country submits a new NDC, they submit it to the UN, we get a notification of when that happens, our data team jumps in and analyzes the full PDF document. And then within a couple of hours, we'll have it already tracked into one of our modules, which is the NDC Enhancement Tracker, which deals mostly with letting users know what are the countries that have a new or the latest NDC and some top level indicators for that. Then we go and do a much deeper analysis where we parse out NDCs into more than 200 indicators. And all that information, it's available for all countries and all versions of NDCs. So in order to show those 200 indicators, we have to group them into categories and sub-indicators. So the way that this works, let me just do a quick zooming here so it's easier to see. We do have these drop-down boxes. I was mentioning the categories, so you can go to category and then select among the ones that we have in here. You can also further refine your search by clicking on the indicators, And you can also refine by geographical location. Now you'll see a map that it's interactive, so you can always hover over the map and get some extra information. And then you have the legends here to the left bottom side of the site. And this circle chart showing you what's the share of global emissions represented by each of these legends. Now, related to climate risk information, we can go, for example, to the loss and damage. And we can see that we have already tracked several indicators on loss and damage. The first one that you can see, it's if the NDC, it's already covering current economic loss and damage figures. You can see whether it's mentioned, not specified, or if we're still working on that. For the ones that it is specified, like the case of South Africa here, for example, you can see that we already include that information into the pop-up box when you hover over the country. So it very quickly allows you to see what each country it's bringing up forward in terms of this indicator. Now, if you prefer a more standardized views of this, you can scroll down and you get this table that has information for all the countries. And you can see here, and you can also sort out information through these icons. Now, if you are more interested in a more quantitative approach, you can also go to our finance and support section in category, and then see that we also have indicators specifically related to identify total economic loss on current loss and damage. I have for current and for future loss and damage finance. You can see here, not too many parties, only 26 have identified this for current losses. And once again, as you hover over, you can see what's the value, and this is in billions of dollars, of USD dollars. Similarly, you can go down and check what are the other indicators on this topic. But this was really to give you a quick overview of what ClimateWatch it's capable of doing. You can always click on the country, and then it takes you to the NDC page where you can dive much deeper into these 200 indicators that I was talking about. And so with that, I don't want to extend too much over time. So I'm going to pass it on to Tapan for System Change Lab.
Thanks so much, Leo. So we've talked a lot today about physical risk. And Systems Change Lab doesn't do as much there. Instead, we focus much more on transitions, identifying high impact actions that can drive those transitions, helping determine what indicators you can monitor towards impacts that go beyond greenhouse gas emissions, but also then covering transition risk, which is what I'll cover briefly here today. A big part of what we do there is showing where transitions are and aren't occurring, where transitions may be at risk, where key solutions and technologies are trending. And then, of course, thinking about those cross-system impacts. How will a transition in power affect industry? How will a transition in transport affect power and so on and so forth. So to briefly cover what we currently have on the platform, we launched about a year ago and have 5 of 15 systems currently online. You might think of systems as sectors. These are currently power, industry, transport, finance, and carbon removal. We have another 10 coming online next year. These include the circular economy, these indicators and systems focused on nature and biodiversity, which will also get much more into physical climate risk. These include freshwater, oceans, agriculture, land and forests, as well as systems focused on things like our governance systems, equity, governance, and so on and so forth. The platform itself has been focused on tracking indicators that are measuring progress towards 2030 and 2050 targets, and then as well pinpointing and tracking those enabling conditions and barriers of change. And using that, we can get a very good sense of where transitions are and aren't occurring and what we might be looking forward to. If you go to the next slide, I do want to note that this is currently a free platform. So just with all the platforms that we're showing today, these are all free and openly available right now. And of course, actively welcoming feedback on everything that we have here. But this slide here is really just briefly showing our framework and how it relates. So we have systems, again, 15 total systems that will be available on the website. Each of those systems then has a series of shifts that are associated with it. And these are the key crucial shifts that will say whether or not a system has transformed what we're trying to track towards. You might think about these as our shift towards zero carbon electricity or transformations to how we get around, including moving towards electric vehicles, but also using less car-centric transport and moving more towards public shared transport. We then split our shifts into two different kinds of indicators. These are focused on one side on targets. Where are we, what targets are we trying to achieve by 2030 and 2050? Where are we towards achieving them? These are all basically science-based targets as well. And then we have our enablers and barriers. And these are the indicators that are really trying to show where are we seeing action occurring? What does that look like? What are we looking forward to? What can accelerate change? If we go to the next slide, you can see just a brief showing of some of the major takeaways that you can glean from the platform. These include things like how quickly we need to phase out unabated coal in order to reach our targets by 2030. And on the flip side of that, how much we need to expand zero carbon electricity. How much we need to scale up global climate finance versus lowering consumption of meat per person. How much we need to reduce the annual rate of deforestation, and so on and so forth. So just some quick insights that you can glean from the platform. But I'm quickly going to actually demo how to use the website. So I'm just going to grab the screen share for a second. Leo, if you could stop sharing, I can. Terrific. Thank you so much. And then just confirming that that's showing up for everyone. So just briefly to cover, there's a ton I could dive into today. Again, this is a pretty large data platform, but really what I want to help you with today is actually just how to find and get data from Systems Change Lab so that you can really use this to the best of your ability to get some good data. So from this homepage, we have something called our data dashboard, which has a grid view. I'll briefly touch on the two different dashboards here. The other one's a pinwheel dashboard. This just brings you to a very high level visual that will show you the current state of play for the different systems we're tracking in terms of what's on track, what's not, where are we seeing progress and where are we not. As you can see, not a lot on track. But if you were to click into any of these, say into transport, you could get a sense for what are the indicators we're tracking to say whether or not a shift is moving in the right direction as quickly as we need it to. But really, I think the more powerful module here that's going to provide you the most value is our grid view. What our grid view is a dashboard that has all of the data available on Systems Change Lab in one place. It's an overwhelming amount of indicators. We currently have over 70 different targets that we're tracking, and then another 167 enablers and barriers that you can track here. But what this view can really do for you is help you to quickly find information that you might be looking for or indicators. So for instance, if you just wanted to see indicators that relate to energy, you could type into this filter box up here and filter down to a curated list of indicators related to energy that aren't just across the power system, but also relate to industry, relate to finance, even to transport where relevant. And you can see here all these different indicators that we're tracking towards different energy, towards the different sectors in energy, including population without access to electricity, share of electricity in industry sectors, final energy demand, so on and so forth. You can also see the same for enablers and barriers and start to get a sense from that. However, maybe you want to look for something beyond that. Maybe you're interested more in electric vehicles. You have the option to type that in as well. And if you're not focused on any of the other systems, you're just focused on transport, you can filter down to just one system, transport, and see everything related to EVs in one place. You again also have that option to dive in via enablers and barriers and see what actions we're tracking that will lead towards progress in those targets. But then maybe you're interested in indicators more related to transition risk. If you just type in risk, you may not find that much on the platform. That's purely because, again, we're not tracking physical risk right now. But what you will find are indicators related to finance that are focused more on measuring and disclosing financial related risks, what we're trying to track there, and how we understand how those things are tracking. So for instance, corporations measuring and disclosing climate related financial risks, as well as nature related financial risks. And then some enablers and barriers there showing where we're seeing progress from corporations, from governments in terms of that kind of tracking. And then finally, what I'll show here is maybe one of my favorite indicators in terms of transitions and how we understand things is related to jobs. So if you type in jobs into this, you'll be able to find a few indicators, but one of the key ones here is showing jobs in the renewable energy industry and the just increasing growth year over year in jobs, showing just how much momentum there is behind this growing industry. And if you were to actually click into this to get a sense of what that explore the data looks like, you'd be brought to a page that has all the indicators related to the shift this is coming from. In this case, that's scaling up zero carbon electricity generation. Just to quickly show, there's a bunch here that you could dive into, a bunch of indicators related to this shift, some text that explains more of what's going on here. But from this indicator itself, you can actually dive in much more deeply to the data, looking year over year at what's happening, getting a sense not just for global data, but also looking at this, maybe you're interested in diving in by specific countries. So you want to see how things are trending with China and the United States in terms of these kinds of changes. And you can select those three on the chart and actually see that as side-by-side comparisons. Or perhaps you want to see this by millions of jobs added by different sectors, perhaps jumping in to see by solar, by wind, by hydropower, where are we actually seeing that growth? You have a couple options for how to view that. Or you can just view this on a map view and just see across the world, where are we seeing that job growth and what is that really looking like? Again, there's a lot more I could dive into here. There's a lot more on what Systems Change Lab can do and offer to you. You will note that a lot of what we have here is publishing data from other sources. And if you want to jump in and understand more of where that data is coming from, again, there's always that I button that was mentioned for Climate Watch and other sources as well that you can jump into to see where all this data is coming from and learn more. But that's about it for me today. So pass it back to Bryn for questions, Q&A.
Thank you so much, Tappan. And just making sure we have everyone on screen. And we'll jump into some questions that we've gotten in the Q&A from our wonderful attendees. And thank you all for your great demonstrations. This has been super educational even for me. So a question for everyone, is your data downloadable and in what format? I know some of you covered this to some extent, but I think it'd be great to get an overview across all of the platforms. We can start with you, Leo. Maybe do AgriAdapt and Climate Watch.
Sounds good. Let me just quickly share again my screen. So on Climate Watch, it really depends on the module that you're in, but you can always go to this tab bar menu, download and visualize, and then data download, and you'll get all the information in here. So we split the data that we have into the historical GHG emissions, something that I didn't cover. We have extensive data on countries, greenhouse gas emissions inventories. And then more related to the information I did cover today on the NDC information. So you can go to NDC content, and then from here, you can filter it out as well as directly from the NDC page. You go to NDC, you will see this download button. That makes it easier. If you have already a selection here, click there. You can download it as an image if you're writing a blog post or something like that. Or you can just download the data and then further use it with your own values. So that is for Climate Watch. And then for AgriAdapt, you can go to any of the layers that you have selected. And then once again, layer info. So this info button, this section pops up. You go all the way down and you can go to download from source and you'll be able to access that. Maybe tap on next.
Sure thing. So I just posted the link in the chat, but just to show it on the platform itself, if you want to download data at any point in time, you can just, from any page, at the very top, you'll see there's a download data button. You just click on that, and that will bring you to a page that has all of our data available for download. There's an option to click just the download all available data. That will just give you a giant zip file with everything we have. Or you can explore based on specific indicators or targets that you're looking for. And we have filters and options to dive in more deeply on that.
And then for Aqueduct, as I showed in the demo, you can download all of the data for the locations that you input, either as a CSV or in a geospatial format via the web page directly. And then I also dropped a link in the chat where you can download the full list of data across all catchments, all locations, and all indicators.
Amazing. Thank you all. Now I'm going to jump through a couple questions that are specifically for your various platforms. So starting with AgriAdapt, what is the spatial resolution of the data on AgriAdapt? And additionally, can folks extract numerical values from those maps for their own further analysis?
Yes, so that information can be found again if you click here in the info button, go all the way down, and you can see, for example, for the production data that we have, the spatial resolution, it's 5 arc minutes, which I'm not too familiar with this unit, but I think it's around 10 kilometers. It really depends on what layer that we have. And then to download, I just show how you can download values from a layer, but you can also download information from all the different locations that you select by going to this icon as you keep adding more and more locations.
Amazing. Thank you, Leo. And then regarding Aqueduct, can the Aqueduct tools for water risk analysis be used to create a flood risk analysis as well? And are climate change projections included in that?
Yeah, good question. So on the Water Risk Atlas, we do have 2 indicators, one on coastal flood risk and one on riverine flood risk. And that shows the risk to population that would be affected by coastal or riverine floods in a given catchment. And that on the Water Risk Atlas, we only have available as a current risk, again, as like a chronic long-term risk. We don't have future projections. But on our Aqueduct Floods tool, which I can drop the link to that in the chat right after this, we do have future projections for flood risk for 2030, 2050, and 2080 for riverine and coastal floods using 2 different climate scenarios and 5 different circulation models. So I'll drop the link to that in the chat.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Another question for you, Leo. Does Climate Watch have any data that addresses loss and damage finance? And what about data speaking to the relationship between health and climate?
Yeah, I think I covered that during my presentation, but happy to show it again. So on loss and damage finance category, I know it can be confusing because we do have an indicator on loss and damage, but if it's finance related, then that supersedes. So finance and support. And then you have identified total economic loss and loss and damage. So these are the 2 indicators that if you're looking for that data, it's available here. Then again, if you need all the data, just go down to the table for an easier visualization. And then on health, we do have some linkages. So for example, in the, let's say, sectoral adaptation measures, we do have indicators specifically related to health. And then if you see this arrow, that means that we do have sub-indicators. So you can see how we're keeping track of how NDCs are reflecting health indicators related to, for example, disease surveillance and control, awareness raising, and behavioral change, or simply health in general. So you can see that it's not one of the most included topics into NDCs. But when it is included, you can see that we flag that in here, and then you can go into the specific NDC page and see how that's been reflected by the country.
Amazing. And then for Systems Change Lab, we had some folks asking if they can use Systems Change Lab to explore country level or regional data, and where could they find that?
Yeah, so I think I covered that briefly in my demo, but I'll let Leo show that again. So if you're looking to explore country level data, you need to be able to go to an indicator with that kind of data. I'll briefly show a couple of those. So if you were to jump in to power, and again, this is scaling up zero carbon electricity generation. If you dive into an indicator with country level data, what you'll find is a couple views. A map view, for one, that will just show you country by country, the different data available. You can always zoom in on that map to actually see specific countries or look for those examples. This view also actually has a time slider. I don't think I mentioned that previously. That lets you just see year over year different changes country by country. In addition, there's also the option to view a comparative timeline view. So currently this is showing for the world, but if you wanted to look by specific countries, maybe you're looking for the European Union, or you're looking to compare the European Union to China and the US to see how they're all doing in terms of renewable share of total capacity, you have that option to always dive in and look at those examples. Now, I will mention for Systems Change Lab, we don't always have country level data available, and that's just because of various data limitations. We try to publish indicators whether or not data is publicly available, because we think it's important to make sure that we understand what it means to transition and what that transition looks like. But that does mean that there are several instances where we don't necessarily have as much data as we would like to publish. We try to be as upfront on that as possible where that's occurring. But that does mean that we don't always have as much country level data as we'd like. Right now, it's not always clear whether or not an indicator will have country level data before you click into it, but that's something we're looking to fix in the next few months.
Amazing. Thank you. Looks like we have time for maybe one more question for everyone. And this one's kind of a fun one. So I'm curious, what's each of your favorite feature on the platform that you demoed today and why? And let's start with Shivani.
Sure. Well, I'm going to say the future projections tab because we just updated it using the latest data from CMIP 6, and in general, at least speaking from the corporate side of things, which is where I work on WR's corporate water stewardship team, a lot of target setting and work thus far in the corporate water stewardship realm has been on addressing current water risks. And so we're really excited that hopefully these new future projections will drive action with an eye towards future risk as well. Thanks for the question.
I can go next. So I didn't cover that one today, but it's definitely my favorite on Climate Watch, and that's the NDC keyword search, which is basically like a Google for NDCs. So if there's any topic that you're interested in that you want to further research on, that it's not covered within the 200 indicators we already have, we do have that option that it's at the top of the NDC module that allows you to search for any term. So if your topic is so niche, we couldn't cover it for all countries, you'll still get that data and see how that term in particular, it's been reflected into all countries' NDCs.
And then for Systems Change Lab, I think the grid view is just really awesome because you're able to kind of see this comparative view of all these different indicators and really find something that speaks to you and your context and what you're trying to understand to better understand trends.
Amazing answers. Now I just want to explore data platforms for the rest of the day. And with that, we're at time. So I'm going to cut off the questions there. If folks have more burning questions, feel free to follow up. We have contact information on each of the platforms. You can reach out with questions, comments, concerns. And I want to thank all of our great panelists for coming and demonstrating their platforms today. This has been wonderful. And thanks to all of our amazing attendees. Hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.